everyone, and welcome back to another week of discussion in gender and society. This week we are delving into some sociological perspectives on gender. So, we're thinking through the lens of sociologists how gender is socially constructed and how these various dynamics manifest in everyday life. So, first up is, we're thinking through, Judith Lorber's piece, The Social Construction of Gender, how, everyone does gender without thinking about it. So, she points out that, for many, it can feel like a fish being asked to analyze the water that they're swimming in when it comes to, delving into any sort of gender analysis. It's something that it can be very difficult for folks to step outside of and think critically about. So we're thinking first about the relationship between sex assignment and gender. So, after last week, we now know that, genitalia is just one component of biological sex. There's also gonads, hormones, and chromosomes to consider, when we're thinking about, the various elements that compose this understanding of biological sex. Yet, the social construction of sex erroneously places primary value on genitalia as the only determinant of biological sex. So, the social construction of sex then sets the stage for the social construction of gender as it places a child into a particular binary gender box. So, we see how, sex and gender are in conversation with each other, yet are distinct processes of social construction. So let's delve into how gender is socially constructed. So, through social processes like parenting, how kids interact with one another in school, we see how, all of these different elements tie into the social construction of gender because processes like this teach us, what it means to be a man or a woman, what it means to be masculine or feminine. So, in order to understand gender as a social institution, it's key to see how gender organizes human life in a profound way. So, in other words, we divide labor and assign tasks based on, what we construct as the purview of men or women. And we construct this idea that, certain labor and tasks come naturally to some and not to others. So, to follow that example of parenting, often women are constructed as the nurturers, the multitaskers. And because that idea is reinforced, those skills and traits are not socially encouraged or developed in men. So, what makes gendered norms and expectations so powerful is that they get intertwined with how, we see ourselves, with how we understand ourselves, and how we conceptualize our own worth, and what we're good at. So, this creates a feedback loop where sex and gender, produce forms of social order, and to step outside that order and resist it can produce different, forms of misunderstanding, can produce forms of backlash and even violence. So, Judith Lorber also points out that gender is a stratification system. So, in other words, gender is part of a system that produces hierarchical understandings of social value in accordance with particular social categories. So, based on, biases and stereotypes and whatnot, all of these factors are key facets of reinforcing, what we deem to have social value in terms of a hierarchy. So, thinking about, gender is a stratification system that intersects with race, class, national origin, and other, social categories, categories of identity and experience that inform how gender operates to, produce these different forms of social value in accordance with a hierarchy. So, in order to highlight, the ways that gender might intersect with other facets of identity and experience, we could think about, for instance, a wealthier white family that, decides to outsource the domestic labor that's necessary to keep their family running, by hiring a woman that just immigrated to this country. So, domestic work is already undervalued in society as it's, ascribed particular forms of social value in terms of, a gender stratification system. But then this also intersects with, experiences of national origin, experiences of class, in that, that woman that, a wealthy white family might hire to do domestic work could be vulnerable to economic abuse if that person, it has undocumented status, and how undocumented status can create a lack of options when it comes to, choices for employment. So, all of these factors can come together to shape that particular, domestic worker's experience in accordance with, gender, class, national origin, etc. So that's just one example. So then we're also thinking about, Peggy McIntosh's piece and delving into these understandings of privilege and thinking about how, Peggy McIntosh defines privilege as this invisible package of unearned benefits and assets that folks remain oblivious to. And it is really key to think about how privilege operates in a big way on the power of oblivion. So, thinking about, oblivion is seen as, or could be understood as a powerful tool, for instance, in K through 12 education, where, we don't often learn about histories of colonization. Because to teach someone how, they are, complicit in, or how they particularly reinforce through relationship to their identity, how they reinforce those different forms of systemic privilege, it really threatens to disrupt forms of social order. So, when we follow this example of, K through 12 curriculum not teaching us histories of colonization, we see how K through 12 curriculum instead tends to, valorize colonial violence, and this is seen through, who we learn about in school. The Richmond monuments are a great example of this as well, like who we build monuments to and whatnot. So thinking about, that sense of oblivion as it relates to learning history is, a key example of, folks remaining blind to their privilege and, just remaining sort of in that oblivious state. So, Peggy McIntosh offers a list of privileges that evidence how everyday racism takes shape. And, she offers these examples of, the whiteness of different social spaces, dolls and makeup lines that have limited shades, and notes how, acknowledging and dismantling these elements of privilege is key to redesigning social systems in favor of equity rather than domination. So finally, our last piece for this week comes from Marilyn Fry, and she offers us an operational definition of oppression, and is thinking about oppression as the suffering or frustration that befalls one partly or largely because of their membership in a particular social category. So oppression can manifest in many ways as, a double bind. So a double bind, would refer to situations in which options are reduced to very few and all of them expose one to penalty, censure, or deprivation as, as a result of their membership in different social categories and how those different social categories come together to shape someone's experience. So, we could think about this through the example, we can think about the concept of a double bind through the example of, someone that sells drugs in order to support their family, and then that person becomes incarcerated because of an incident of racial profiling, and then after being released from incarceration has difficulty finding a job outside of selling drugs because of their record. So then it creates this double bind with a lack of choices and options because of these different experiences that have intersected and shaped, that person's narrative. So, When we think about how, oppression functions, Marilyn Frye also gives us this example of a bird cage to highlight the ways that different forms of oppression can characterize someone's experience, producing barriers or obstacles to, growth and thriving. So, with the example of the bird cage, she notes that, you can look at the individual bar of a bird cage and wonder at a microscopic level, oh, well, why can't the bird just fly around it? But if we looked at it from a macroscopic level, you would see the various bars that are intertwining and, preventing that bird from, flying out of the particular bird cage because all of those systemic barriers and obstacles are coming together to shape their narrative. So, both Peggy McIntosh and Marilyn Frye are highlighting, this myth of meritocracy in our country as well. So, when we think about the myth of meritocracy in our country, we're thinking about that notion of, the reinforcing an idea that people can just pick themselves up from their bootstraps and, become a Jeff Bezos, in our country, and thinking about how, when we look at the different social factors that characterize different people's experiences based on their relationships to privilege and oppression, we see how the world is not a level playing field for everyone, that, this notion of picking oneself up by their bootstraps does not apply when we do really investigate the ways that privilege and oppression functions and characterizes different folks' experiences. So we'll talk more about this on the discussion board, and I look forward to hearing what you all have to say. All right, have a great week, everyone.